Well, it's a pleasure to be here today, and thank Joe and Liz for organizing this, and Liz as well. So I'm supposed to talk about designing innovative cognitive intervention trials, and I'm really going to sort of give you a little bit of a recipe for how I've come up with some of the more real-world trial research that I've done. So what is an innovative cognitive intervention? I think innovation is a very critical aspect of grant applications that is problematic for many researchers. And I'm not sure I want to use the term innovative here to talk about, I think there's many innovative interventions that are typical cognitive training studies would have interesting interventions. So I'd like to use the term non-traditional today. That's really what I'm going to talk about. And these are interventions outside of the usual cognitive training or exercise approaches that I think we know quite a bit about. And they typically do involve some aspect of the real world, either as an independent or a dependent variable. And I just want to give you a little bit of my thinking and how I sort of go about some of the studies that I've done. I think it's very important that you have mechanisms and theories underlying your interventions. And so the first thing to do to isolate a problem is to project the implication of a basic research finding for the real world. So too many years ago that I can like to think about, I was studying aging and memory, and I was very interested in the practical aspects of memory problems. And I thought about, well, what's the biggest memory problem with the most serious consequences that we have? And it seemed to me it was processing medical information, making medical decisions, and taking medications correctly. So that became a domain of research that I focused on for a very long time. And I want to show you how I took apart the problem so you can sort of get a sense of take a complex real-world behavior that's a problem and parse it into some pieces, and it becomes pretty straightforward what kinds of approaches you might take. So for example, we know that people often don't understand their medication regimens, right? So that's really a working memory deficit. They can't organize the information, they don't understand, they have to integrate information across all these medication bottles. So in that case, it seems like maybe the intervention should be, well, let's work on reducing working memory load and introduce medication organizers, medication charts, and so forth. And we found good evidence that that type of thing did lead to adherence. I was thinking about this last night. We actually took people's medications and put them in medication organizers. That was probably, I don't think I would do that today, let's put it that way. This was about 20 years ago. But anyways, that was one manipulation that worked very successfully. Well, what about if people can't, maybe the problem is that people can't remember to take their medications. Well, in that case, you have a prospective memory problem, if that's what you think the problem is. And then, in this case, we used beeping bottle caps, which was a very novel intervention, again, a number of years ago. And that also led to adherence, particularly in lower SES populations. So a third approach was, think about, a third approach to interventions, broadly speaking, is think about the environment. There's been a lot of talk about that this morning, in which an individual is operating. Interventions don't always have to be direct and train the subject. Sometimes you can use the environment as an intervention. And I was very taken by Peter Golitz's work that suggests that when you imagine a future behavior, think about all the contextual cues associated with the behavior, like say you want to go running tomorrow morning and you start picturing getting up, putting on your running shoes, putting out your clothes, what route you're going to take. When you wake up the next morning, you're just going to get up and go running because you've got all the cues around you that stimulate the behavior. So I thought we could use that kind of approach for medication adherence. And so in this case, the manipulation was to compare this kind of rehearse your intentions to implement a behavior compared to try to actively remember that you're supposed to use a glucose monitor, okay? at these various times. So we trained people to use glucose monitors and sent them home, and they were supposed to do it at 3 or 4 different times every day. And the rehearsal, the implementation intentions worked like a charm, and we were able to greatly facilitate adherence to the glucose monitor, particularly in older adults, because they lead very routine lives. And so if they had to do it the same time every day, the contextual cues were very stable for these people. And again, a very simple technique. It takes a minute to develop an implementation intention to do something. And it can be very effective in driving people's behavior. Try it when you want to finish an article. Keep rehearsing that you're going to go home, you're going to sit at your desk, you're going to pull out the paper, and you're going to do all these things. But it does work quite well, and that just gives you an idea of how to come up with an idea and take a problem apart and focus on mechanism in a way that can be very effective in pulling together a project. The other thing, very much along the lines of what Laura was saying, that was a remarkable talk, technology offers amazing new opportunities for innovative dependent measures. You have, besides the internet, you have the opportunity to measure a lot of private behaviors by using things like Fitbit, the Apple Watch, smartphones, or tablets. To give you an idea of what we did, it's also important to keep behavior below the monitoring below the radar, so the subject's not conscious of it at all the time. When we first started doing medication adherence many years ago, we used barcoders. We gave the kinds of people the kinds of barcoders that were used in warehouses, and every time they took their drug, they barcoded it. And it was a very primitive technology and a real nightmare to use. Then we moved to bottle caps that were sensitive, and every time the subject opened a bottle cap, it would record the date and time, much less obtrusive, very, very expensive. At the time, it was about $100 a bottle cap. And I think it's much less expensive now. The other thing that I'd like to mention, very much related to some of the things Laura was talking about as well, you can measure, Marty Slowinski has some very innovative data on frequent short tests of cognitive function in the natural environment. You can use the internet, you can use iPads, you can use smartphones, lots of options. One point I want to make, we did try to probe subjects on an iPad 5 times a day at various random times to find out what they were doing after we did an engagement intervention. And the subjects found that very stressful. They wanted to be there when they got probed, and 5 times a day was too much, so you have to be careful how much you keep the subjects on their toes, because it can be problematic. So I'm going to talk to you about my biggest and latest intervention project. I called it the Synapse Project. This was a study I've wanted to do my whole life since I've been a cognitive aging researcher, which has been my whole life. So the question is, can we defer cognitive aging and change the brain by leading a deeply engaged lifestyle? We all think that's probably true, or many of us think it's true. But actually there's almost no research on it in humans other than correlations, because how do you randomly assign people to lead an engaged lifestyle? So I really wanted to do this, and I came up with a mechanism that I thought would work, but here's sort of the scientific reasoning behind this whole thing. We know that neuroplasticity exists from the brain imaging data, right? And what mechanism activates plasticity? I think that's very critical. You can't just say, I want to go do this. So after doing some reading and some thinking and looking at the animal literature as well as human, I'm hypothesizing that the mechanism behind engagement effects is mental effort. You have to engage in consistently demanding cognitive tasks. And through that engagement, you'll increase activation of attentional and memory neural circuitry, and it'll result in better memory performance. So that's sort of a model of how an intervention might work in this particular case. So the mechanism I'm interested in was sustained mental engagement, and then how do you instantiate that? Well, after a lot of thought, I came up with quilting, which is a very complex abstract behavior. that involves a lot of mental rotation and so on, and ability to reverse geometric shapes and use software-driven sewing machines and so forth. So it's pretty complex behavior. Digital photography might not sound too complex, but have you ever tried using Photoshop? That's what we had our elderly adults learn, and they had to be computer novices. And then we also had people learn iPad apps, a different app every week. And all of the people spent 15 hours a week for 14 months in this study. We had an amazing 85% compliance rate, and they had to agree to be randomly assigned. That was critical. And then our outcome measure was, could we get cognitive enhancement on traditional in-laboratory cognitive batteries. So we had a pretest, of course, of cognitive function. Then we had 6 interventions, and they were all critical. We had quilting, photo, dual. Dual was 7 weeks of one and 7 weeks of the other. Those were the high challenge groups. Then we had 3 low challenge groups. One was a group that just had fun. We made every effort not to teach them anything. They would cook, they would watch movies, they would go on field trips, and they generally had a great time. We had a placebo group that worked at home on knowledge-based tasks like word stem completion, watch National Geographic on television, listen to Diane Reeves, listen to classical music. They did that about 15 hours a week. We had a no treatment group. Then we had post-test cognition, and then we tested cognition a year later as well to see how durable the effects were. This was a rather challenging study to run. People really liked being in Synapse, and one of the problems I had was we had these very subtle questionnaires, but people would still, they would lie to get into the study. And anyways, I won't go into that. But it was a very challenging study to run, but lots of fun. And I did have professional instructors that were in the study, and they were, of course, separate from the people who did the testing. So here's just very quickly what we found. These are the 3 high mental challenge versus the low mental challenge groups. At pre-test, they were the same. At post-test, you can see the productive group, also called the high challenge group. The 3 productive groups did better than the control groups. And then here you can see individual group performance. The group that had the largest effect was digital photography. And it was significantly better than the control group. And even a year later, those effects were maintained. And you could also see the quilting, the dual group also showed some improvement and a little more variance in the quilt group. So the effect there was not significant, but very close. And these were all corrected for multiple comparisons. You also want to know how general is your effect. There are a few subjects driving it. These are standardized gain scores, and you can see that in the photo group, just about everybody profited in a significant way, and the effects become smaller to non-existent as you get to the control groups. Then, because I wanted to see what we were doing to subjects' brains, I had a very small N, 40 people, and I imaged, the whole study had about 260 people, but I imaged 40 people's brains, so I think about 20 in each group. And people performed a task where they had easy words that they had to say were living or non-living, like dog and book. They had hard words like virus and sponge. And we would subtract the neural activation associated with the hard minus the easy words. And it allowed us to see how good subjects were at modulating their neural activity to difficulty. And as Patty Ruger-Lorenz's work has shown, older adults typically can't modulate. They just have the gas on all the time. And young adults show less activation to easy words and more activity to hard words. So this is my last slide. This is the neural substrate of engagement. You can see here at pre-test, again, productive is high challenge, receptive is low challenge. The subjects who were in the productive versus the low challenge group looked identical pre-test, okay? At post-test, this is the performance and their ability to modulate easy to hard. It looks like there's some differences here. And when you subtract pre-test minus post-test, you can see that the productive engagement subjects showed a ramping up of activity in regions that indeed are associated with memory and attention, providing some evidence for a neural substrate. You can see that the control subjects didn't show any change in any additional activity. So we think we found a mechanism of change, but we need to collect more subjects and are currently trying to get some funding for a clinical trial to be run in multiple countries to really assess these effects. So I don't want to belabor this, but it gives you some ideas about how to approach doing research in the real world and some sort of systematic ways to develop theories, mechanisms, and really strengthen your research through integrating psychological theories with real world problems. Thank you very much.